Me.
Oh, I have a
Okay,
cat
we're
that does a
live,
lot of
and
talking.
the Senate Transportation Committee is on this morning at 9 o'clock, and our first item is Joe Segali. We're talking about road user charges study. This is not Senator Chitna's toll road, is it, or something? We're not
No.
pointing at the tolls, are we, Joe?
No, we're not. Well, it
Okay,
depends how you look at it.
all right. Okay, Senator Pertlick has joined us, and so we have a full committee, and thank you for all being here this morning, and let's get started. Good morning, Joe.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And Liz, I need to share my screen. And I'm going to be talking to the committee this morning about our plan to develop an implementation plan for a road usage system in Vermont, road usage charge system in Vermont, which is really, driven initially by the need to find, fair share payments from electric vehicles and other high mileage vehicles.
Okay, that sounds better.
Yeah. I thought you might like that.
Yeah, I like that one better than like a toll booth.
And if I'm not sure because I'm multitasking.
This is a study we had asked for, right, Joe? This is a study to find out how to supplement the gas tax.
Yeah, and we have exactly, and we haven't done it yet.
Okay.
And we're laying the groundwork for it, and want to tell you kind of what the basic concept is,
Okay.
and
Okay.
kind of where we're going with it, and provides a little bit of education on it.
All right.
So just so I don't think I introduced myself this morning, but just for the record, I'm Joe Segali. I'm the Director of Policy Planning and Research for the Vermont Agency of Transportation. So I'm going to first start out by talking about what the need is for this. I know the committee members are probably already familiar, but just to kind of put it on the record, and then explain the concept that we've come up with that we're going to then develop an implementation plan around, and talk about what the objectives of that plan are, and then what the next steps are. So just starting with looking at electric vehicles and their adoption over the last 8 or so years. And so what this chart shows might be a little confusing, I hope not, but is on this side, this axis right here is the number of vehicles, gasoline and diesel vehicles that are registered in Vermont, and those are the blue bars. You can see that it's been, a little, it's been flat in terms of it growing over the years, and it's somewhere, maybe 575,000 or so vehicles in that category. And then on this axis, it's the number of electric vehicles, and there's two types of electric vehicles. There's all electric vehicles that don't have a gas engine. Then there's plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that run both on electricity and on gas. And so you can see this line here has increased significantly since 2012. The number of vehicles over the last 5 years, electric vehicles, has increased by about almost 50% a year. And we don't, obviously, because we're starting with small numbers, right? So but nonetheless, it's increasing quickly. And if we look at just gas hybrids, this is the same chart for gas and diesel vehicles. Again, registrations are sort of flat, and you can see that gas hybrids, they grew pretty fast initially, but they're starting to flatten out. There's about 12,000 of those in Vermont right now, and they're growing in the last 5 years about 6% a year. But we don't expect that growth to continue, and these vehicles probably are going to be replaced, more likely with some type of electric vehicle. So the challenge that this causes in terms of how it impacts the transportation fund. So there's all electric vehicles. There's almost 1,300 registered in Vermont now. Plug-in hybrid, there's just over 2,000, and there's 12,000 gas electric hybrids. And a few years ago, there was a study done in Vermont, a legislative study that looked at what a flat fee might be to make up for the lost gas tax. So I used those numbers. This number down here, $58, that's actually a national average for gas electric hybrids, because we didn't have that number handy. And if you look at it's more for all electric because they don't purchase any gas. It's less for plug-in hybrid because they do purchase some gas, and even more or less for gas electric hybrid.
Joe, how would you know if someone plugs in if they're all electric vehicle or they're a hybrid electric vehicle? How's that determined?
Well, I don't think I don't think we can know that right now when they plug
Okay.
into yeah, but probably the technology is available that it would be able to figure that out.
Okay, I didn't know how that was detected
Yeah.
because I guess I've never experienced one, but you plug it in and there's got to be the same plug-in takes both, I guess, a hybrid
Right.
and okay.
Right. So when you crunch these numbers, bottom line is it's the impact is about almost $1 million a year right now. And you put that in the context of the total state transportation fund, which is $265 or so million a year. It's manageable at the moment, but it's important to look, long term about what's going to happen. And so Drive Electric Vermont did some forecasting on different adoption scenarios for electric vehicles, looking out to 2050. And they did that initially so that the utilities could get a handle on, sort of what the demand might be as electric vehicles were adopted in the future. So I took that forecast and, applied the cost to it to see what the impact on the transportation fund would be. And so there's a low scenario, which it's assuming that electric vehicles reach 40% of all light duty vehicles by 2050. And that's kind of that's sort of the path that we're on right now. And it's consistent with our participation in California's zero emission vehicle program. The middle scenario, I've got to take a look here at my notes, is it assumes that electric vehicles are 60% of light duty vehicles by 2050, and that's if we're, continuing to be successful in promoting electric vehicles over time. And then the high scenario assumes that we reach the comprehensive energy goal of 90% renewables by 2050. And so you can kind of back that all out and reach these different scenarios by decade. So by 2030, the low scenario, we're showing the impact to be, about $4 million. And the high impact to be about 21 million. And when you stretch that out to 2050, you get anywhere from 20 to $50 million a year. So this is the problem that we have to solve, which is continued lost revenue because we depend on the gas tax. And we know that we're probably going to be more aggressive in Vermont in promoting electric vehicles over time. So maybe the medium or the high scenario is probably unrealistic for us to be planning for. So this is the challenge. We're managing it okay right now, but we've got to start putting the system in place to make sure we can handle it in the future.
Joe?
So, yes.
Yes. Go ahead, Senator Perchlik.
Yeah. Did you also do this for just like the CAFE standards or other reasons that the gas tax is going down?
This chart right here is just focused on EV adoption. It doesn't bring into the impact of higher mileage vehicles. So in that sense, it might be a little bit conservative, on the low side of the impact.
Senator Ingalls, you had a question also?
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Segale is going to get there, and I apologize for jumping ahead of it, but I don't know why we wouldn't figure out. I mean, most of these vehicles have special kinds of plugs. They have to have adaptation to the electrical grid or the electrical source to charge effectively. But I don't know why we wouldn't be just collecting that tax at that point in time when they're charging. It's a more equitable way for people to be able to pay the tax other than trying to pay it at the end of the year on their income tax or trying to figure out what they do for mileage. I don't know why it wouldn't be. We wouldn't try to.
I think that's what we're going to. That's what we're shooting for. Is that correct? That was our intention. I don't know. Is that different now or?
No. Well, so there was another study done, of course, a couple of years ago,
Okay.
And it looked at trying to implement that, which I agree. It seems like that would be the simplest way to go, right?
That's what that was our goal, though. We talked about this many times. That way, if you travel 10 miles a year or the person traveling, you pay according to how many miles you travel, like gasoline.
Well, so there's two things. One is one is doing it based on mileage, and that's kind of where we're suggesting we may want to go. But another option, which Senator Ingalls is referring to, has to do with it's just like when you pay the gas tax at the gas pump.
Right.
Basically, when you plug in, you're into a charger, it's just built into the cost of charging.
That's what I thought. Then and that percentage of that would go from the person who has a
But
charger back to. Yes.
But I thought the complication there, or it'd be the technology that can separate out if you're doing home charging, how
Right.
much of that charge is for your car as opposed to your other electrical. And so I think probably if you have smart charge and other capacity, but if you're using, remember this discussion, if you're just using a regular plug-in method, like an extension cord, which takes forever. So
Right.
that was the one limitation on that, is the home charge. It's very easy to do on the commercial, on the fast charge stations, and that's the easy part. It was how you isolate the transportation related electrical use when it's done at home.
And understanding how we are, we don't want to wait for anything. I think that would be easy to retrofit. I mean, I think most of the charging stations are going to be, people want to plug it in and they want to know when they go down there the next morning that they have the full charge. And I think it'd be very easy to retrofit these charging stations to recognize when they're charging a car versus their whatever refrigerator.
I think that so in terms of Vermont residents, most of the charging is going to happen at home and maybe at work, right? So, and as Senator Kitchell was explaining, right now the technology isn't there to sort of separate that out and isolate that so that you could put a transportation fee onto that electric charge and it's only being paid, for the electricity being, used by the electric vehicle. So in a perfect world, that would be the most efficient way to do this. But right now that's not available. So what we're suggesting, and granted, it's because of that, this is a little bit more of a complicated concept or a system. And so the concept that we have is that for Vermont registered vehicles, they would pay either a flat fee, and that would be based on the average miles driven, or could be based on more than the average miles driven, or they would then have the option to maybe just pay based on the miles that they're driving. And I'll talk about the methodologies for tracking that and how that would really work. And so that would apply to all electric vehicles, plug-in electric hybrids, and potentially high efficiency vehicles. Hybrids are one of them, but some states, are allowing, are considering higher mileage vehicles above 20 miles per gallon, which seems kind of low, but we would have to sort of figure out what that threshold is, which I think it's the Senator Perchlik's earlier question. For out-of-state vehicles, we would use a per kilowatt hour transportation fee at public charging stations, because that is feasible to do. And so that would really only be available to all electric or plug-in electric hybrid vehicles. So I'll talk about each one of these kind of separately because they need some additional explanation. So just starting with the flat fee option, and this is something that's been evaluated in Vermont in the past.
Joe, could
Yes.
I ask a question? Go back to the other slide, if you would, please. Okay.
The slide?
Yeah, it's not uncommon that electric vehicle owners, in fact, are charging at home, but they're also having to use fast charge stations. So it means that they could actually be paying twice. They could be paying the fee at the fast charge, and they could be paying another flat fee, or if we go with a flat fee or even the mileage, there's no way to allocate, in fact, the mileage where they've already paid for it. I guess I'm wondering, is there a potential of a double charge? Because I know that you can't get to Hanover and back without a charge, particularly and so you're stopping in Bradford at the fast charge. So my question is, is there a potential of some duplication of charge here? But you don't need to answer that now, but it's just a question about how you would isolate that very common practice of, if you're doing any traveling other than just, a very relatively short commute, you're going to have to be using those stations where there is a fee.
Right. And you're absolutely right. That is a potential issue that we're going to have to figure out. And really we'd have to figure out, is there a way, if a Vermonter's plugging into a public charging station, can we know that that's a Vermonter, and then put a mechanism in place to provide a credit? So we would have to see if that's possible. So you can see this gets complicated, right?
Mhm.
So just talking about flat fees a little bit, this obviously is the simplest approach. And, there's a bunch of states, 26 states have already established flat fees for electric vehicles. And, we considered that in Vermont at one point, not too long ago, but I think at one point, I think the strategy was, well, let's wait till electric vehicles are 15% of the vehicle sales, and maybe that's the right time to start doing it, because there's a concern about this being a disincentive. But it has the advantage of being simple, right? And you charge it, and maybe you would spread the cost out in 3 payments over the year. One disadvantage is if you're paying it at vehicle registration, to get hit with another $120 while you're registering your vehicle is, you sort of feel that pain. But if you stretch it out over multiple months, it's not so bad, or quarterly. But then that makes it more complicated to administer, right? So the idea is that this is available, this gets established, and it's a choice. You can choose to do the flat fee option, or you can choose mileage-based user fee. And sorry, this is a little simplistic, but just to make sure everybody understands, it's really moving from how much gas you use, or how much, if you aren't using any gas, to just basing the fee on miles driven. And we have to consider, miles driven in Vermont and outside of Vermont. That's a complication, and there's ways to handle that. So, at this level, it's kind of a very simple concept, right? When you think about it from there. But when you start getting into the weeds a little bit, it looks something like this. And the way that this has to work is that key to making mileage-based user fees work is an account manager. And this is a vendor, essentially. It would be, it's important that it's not part of state government. It's, there needs to be kind of a firewall with the account manager. And so what happens is there's a vehicle, it's driving so many miles, traveling so many miles. There's methods, which I'll explain in a second, that send the mileage to the account manager. The account manager is tracking that. Of course, this is all automated. They send an invoice to the motorist. And again, this would happen all online. It would be automatic. There's an account set up. There's the motorist would have, put money into that account, and it would be drawn down, automatically. And then the account manager receives the payment. Account manager, takes all the money and sends it to the state, to the transportation fund. And there should be another arrow here where we spend it on the transportation system. And then the state, the Agency of Transportation, DMV, has oversight function and actually, hires the account manager. So that's the basic concept of how this would get set up. It's obviously more complicated than the gas tax, but if you go back a couple charts, that we're just not going to be able to rely on the gas tax in the long term. So this is the kind of system that we may have to put in place, unless, of course, we do get to the point where there are smart meters everywhere and we can just, assess the fee, at home. So that's the basic idea.
You have a question, someone?
Joe, this is awesome. I love this conversation. So and maybe I'm going to steal your thunder from where you're going to go with this, but I feel like what you've been presenting so far, you've been trying to overlay our existing models into this new world with electric vehicles. And I'm just wondering if you're leading towards realizing that it might not make the most sense to try to continue to track the mileage from the vehicle, but instead just try to make our intersections and our roadways more intelligent. Because if we're really trying to optimize network throughput, assess fair usage, and increase public safety, and I'm ecstatic that Charlie Baker's on, I feel like what other states are doing, and that the technology is there, we just need to start thinking about it. But we're thinking about the 10, 20, 30-year horizon, about making our streetlights being able to monitor and track real-time throughput, including observing which vehicles are going through, and using that data to possibly assess usage, which would also capture out-of-state drivers and so on, but also being able to in real time optimize network through traffic by directing cars which are increasingly intelligent and connected to the network. So are you starting to, at the starting stage, thinking about different models about tracking usage besides mileage devices in the car or recordings with account managers?
I haven't thought about how sort of smart traffic signals, if you will, would fit into this equation. I think, my first reaction to that is we don't have a lot of traffic signals in Vermont, really. And, especially compared to other states, we maybe have 300 or so traffic signals, and you go into like, New York City, there's probably that many in a few blocks, and so I don't think I don't think that those would work necessarily to capture all of the mileage data that we would need to capture. I think there's lots of other great reasons why we need smart traffic signals. I think we might have talked about it previously, just about efficiency and safety and all of that. But I'm not sure I see a role in that, but it's something to think about as we kind of move forward.
There's another dimension. This sort of raises in my mind the policy discussion we had around privacy and license plates readers. There's a tremendous amount of concern in terms of this data, how it's captured, what it's used for. So it's a much larger discussion, simply in light of what we experienced with the automated license plate readers, which I think just maybe there's no place or one place that is now using them because of storage and other issues. So it's interesting, but it begs that conversation about privacy.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll get to that too. You're all like 3 steps ahead of me this morning. So I want to talk a little bit about the options for collecting mileage. The one at the top of the list here is it's simple. You just read the odometer every year, and that's done during the inspection. And I think the bill, I can't remember the bill number, it's a House bill, it came out of Ways and Means that actually is proposing a vehicle miles travel tax. It's basically saying, do that, take the odometer reading every year and then, charge the fee based on that. The challenge is how do you determine miles driven out of Vermont, right? There needs to be the methodology to do that. And once you start getting into a way to do that, that's verifiable and consistent, it sort of falls apart. But again, that's a simple way to do it. Another option is you can take a picture actually of your odometer and that, email that in. And there's technology available that knows it's your car, actually. I just learned about this the other day. But that requires the motorist to do that, right? So, there's just this human, interaction. So there's a little bit of a disadvantage there. Another option, which right now is the most common option, is to use a plug-in device, and it looks something like this. So it fits into the port underneath your steering wheel to the left. You kind of have to get down and you plug it in. And I participated, and Michelle Boomhauer did as well, in a pilot a year or so ago, where we got, these were mailed to us, we plugged them in our car, and they track your mileage and they gave you other sort of information. And so this device can, it has GPS or maybe not a GPS on board. It could just simply track total mileage. So you don't know, this gets to the privacy question. So you don't know where people went, but again, you don't know inside or outside of Vermont. It could track mileage on an aggregate scale of you're just in Vermont and it doesn't matter. You don't track mileage when you're out of Vermont, right? So you don't, and you don't, maybe it like in a quarter of a year, you travel this many miles, but you don't know where exactly. You're just in Vermont. Or it can travel specifically the roads that you're on. We did that on the pilot. I was interested just to kind of see how it worked out. So that's one option. Another option, and this is more for the future, is automaker telematics. And so instead of having to plug in that device, it's just built into the car when you buy it. And I think one of the Teslas has this on board now, but that's going to take time to unfold, get on the market. And then simply just using your smartphone. So you bring your smartphone in your car, and it tracks your mileage and sends that in. But again, that requires the motorist to actually remember to bring their smartphone. Sometimes they'll forget it. So this is probably, in the short term, one of these pilot devices seems to be, one of the favored approaches. But these are all the kind of details that we need to think out and figure out. Again, one of the challenges with that pilot device is that, not the pilot device, but the onboard device, is that it gets mailed to you and you have to remember to put it in, right? And some people, they forget or they can't figure it out, so it's not perfect.
If you didn't put it in, you won't pay.
Exactly.
So what's the incentive of putting it in?
Well, so this this is a good segue to this slide. So this slide shows what's happening around the country. There's been, lots of pilots, and there's been studies around the country. There's 2 states that have now implemented this mileage-based user fees. One is Oregon, and that's after many years of pilots and studies. And in Oregon, they actually have 3 different account managers. There's a flat fee. So again, the motorist can say, I'm just going to stick with the flat fee, or they can choose to pay by the miles. And then there's 3 different account managers, and those account managers compete for customers. And they provide different value-added services, like they can do on-the-fly emissions testing and give you information about the health of your battery and other stuff like that. And in Utah, in Oregon, anybody, if you have a car that gets more than 20 miles to the gallon, you can join this. You can decide to pay by the miles, or you pay a flat fee. So in Utah, they launched their system last year. And this, I think, got Michelle excited, because they did what we're proposing to do, which is kind of develop basically the feasibility study and implementation plan. They had an advisory committee. They got to the end of it and they said, let's just go for it. And they launched the system, and it's voluntary. And I'm trying to remember, Senator Moz, what your question was, because I was going to get to that. Oh yeah, and so they've got a couple of they have 2 people running the program, and one of the issues was they sent out these devices to put in your car, and sometimes people forget. So put them in, right? And so there's an enforcement issue there, but they're very gentle about it. First you send out, letter, hey, did you have problems, putting this in? Can we help you out? But if somebody is trying to just get out of paying the fee, then there has to ultimately be some kind of enforcement, right? So that's just another complication. So Utah has been implementing this. They have forecasts on how many people would sign up, and more people signed up than they expected. And actually, they got a little bit overwhelmed by it, because they were just launching this and trying to figure it out, but they really jumped in. But the point here is that this has been going, this issue of how to establish mileage-based user fees. It's been really an active issue for the last 10 years or so. Lots of states have looked into it. So we're not on the cutting edge of it, and we can really benefit from the technology advancements that have been out there. Many of the pilots are testing, they had tested those little devices and how well do they work, and developing the framework for the account managers and all that stuff. So we can just build off that and kind of move forward with a design that, is right for Vermont. I want to mention too that we're part of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which is Florida to Maine, and used to be called the I-95 Coalition. And they've done some pilots looking at cross-state travel, and that's where Michelle and I participated in that pilot a couple of years ago. And the executive director, Trish Hendren, she's terrific. And if you want to hear more from, to get a more national perspective, she's offered to come talk to you if that's something you're interested in. So now just some of the issues and challenges with mileage-based user fees are the administrative costs. In Utah, they forecasted it would take 5 years before they got to the point where they're breaking even on an annual basis. So there's an upfront investment, and another 5 years after that to break even on the cumulative costs. We have to think about the organization, how it's managed, rate setting. The legislature sets the tax rate. And so, obviously, you have a role in setting that, but anytime there's a fee set up, how do you keep it current? Equity is a big issue, and it's always a question that's asked, with the mileage-based user fees. Studies done in other states have shown that, the concern is in rural areas. Well, rural drivers drive longer distances, so are they going to pay more? And you have to compare that to the gas tax, which is really, not actually equitable in and of itself. I mean, if you live in a rural area, you're driving more, you're paying more gas taxes. If you're lower income, it's probable that your vehicle's older and gets worse gas mileage, you're paying more. So, if you just use a flat or consistent cost per mile, everybody's paying the same cost per mile, regardless of how efficient your vehicle is. So, but we need to evaluate that in the Vermont context to, understand how Vermonters travel and what the implications are of that. As Senator Kitchell mentioned, privacy is a big issue. People don't like the idea of their mileage being tracked, where they're going. And the strategy to address that is really about providing choice. So if you're concerned about your mileage being tracked, you could pay the flat fee. Or we could also, there's ultimately, for this is going to get established, obviously we're going to need statutory language that enables it, and there's strategies that could be put into that language that protects the data and keeps it private. And the advantage of that account manager is they hold the data, not the state. And there could be requirements put in place that the data are destroyed a month after the bill's paid, or something like that. Or there might be reasons why we do want to see the data, and that could be sort of built into it as well. There's just data security, it's privacy and data security are kind of related, but we need to think about cybersecurity as part of that. Setting up a new fee structure like this requires public acceptance, and a lot of the pilots that are done that's a big part of it. It's getting the education out there on how the transportation system is paid for and why this is necessary and how the system works. Compliance and enforcement, the example that we just talked about, if somebody sort of forgets to put this device on their car, how do you deal with it? And what if they're just not paying? Interoperability has to do with if mileage-based user fees are expanded across state lines, how do we get paid from New York, and how does New York get money from us? Scalability, putting a system in place that can grow is important, and the technology is always evolving, so we need a system in place that can evolve with it. So I think you get the sense of this is not straightforward and easy, but it is manageable, and other states are starting to do it. Okay, so moving on to the per kilowatt hour fee. So again, the idea here is that we want to target out-of-staters that are driving electric vehicles in Vermont. And it's important to know that about 25% of the gas tax revenue that's collected in Vermont comes from out-of-staters. Those aren't, small percentage of those are probably electric vehicles at the moment, but again, in the long term, that's going to become an issue. As we've already talked about, the challenges or issues with this, number one is making sure that Vermonters aren't double paying. If they're paying a flat fee or a mileage-based user fee, how do we credit them if they do have to use a public charging station? There needs to be the business process for collecting the fees and transferring it to the state. It involves, the utilities. There's a lot of utilities in Vermont, and the public charging stations are all over the place. It also involves, the Public Utility Commission may have to be involved in rate setting. I'm not totally clear on that. I don't know if the legislature just has the authority to set the rate in statute, or what the PUC role is. But they certainly have a role in working with the utilities and how money might flow from utilities to the state and so on. And then there's another player as well, which who owns the charging station. So while it's a public charging station, it could be owned by a restaurant, or a hotel, or a convenience store, a gas station. And so now you're adding that person into the mix of the transfer of funding and all of that. And then there are reporting requirements. So there's less examples of this being done around the country. Mileage-based user fees, it's kind of all over the, like I showed the previous map, it's kind of all over the place. But so this is something that, these are the details that we have to work out. And that's why we need to do this study. The idea is is this feasible, and can we make it work? So the plan that we're going to be putting together is, number one, it's determining the rates for the flat fee, mileage-based user fee, and the per kilowatt hour transportation fee. Those have to be, there's been previous studies on that, but we need to update those, and we need to do that in the context of how equitable are the fees, and should they include the administrative costs or not. And so there's work that has to be done there. And how does the system actually operate? I kind of touched on some of the challenges there. All those specifics will get mapped out and described, so we really understand kind of how this is going to work, what the organizational structure is and staffing required. Again, an important part. I mentioned, 2 people in Utah, maybe there's something, along the same lines that we would need in Vermont. The DMV, interestingly enough, in Utah, there was a little bit of work setting up initially, but they're not actually as engaged in it. There's some automated connections that got made, but we need to determine that. I guess this is the ultimate question: is it operationally feasible in Vermont, and is it financially sustainable? At what point do we hit the break-even point on this? So there'll be here are the specific things that we need to do. That's the roadmap. The communication, we'll have a communication plan, because again, we're going to need to explain this to the public. And then ultimately we will decide, like I said, Utah said, we're ready to go. And we feel like we should just go for this. And if we got to that point, that would be really interesting, but obviously we would need, the legislature's approval for that. More likely we'll decide we want to pilot some component of it. Maybe we'll want to pilot the per kilowatt hour fee part, because that's never, I can't find examples of those being piloted, or we may want to pilot the whole thing, but ultimately we'll get to that point. And what we'll have is we'll understand what will it cost to pilot something like this. And there's grants available. The federal government does have a grant specifically for this sort of project, because they've been trying to encourage it around the country. And so I think that might be the last slide. Oh, yeah, I think I just hit this. So our next steps are, we're going to be hiring a consultant in the next couple of months. We'll be working on this, over the summer and the fall. We'll come back to you with what our recommendations are next legislative session, and then we'll figure out where we go from there. Are we going to move into implementation, or are we going to do a pilot?
Yeah, Senator Ingalls.
I just hear all of this, and the information is great. It's solid. It's great. But I just see layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of complexity, and hiring more people and getting more expense, when it's just simple to me in my brain. And I'm sorry, I can be accused of being rather simple. Just charge them when they plug that car in. The technology's there. At some point in time, we're going to have to get to these manufacturers and say, hey, listen, great. We want electric cars in Vermont. We want a lot of them. But as part of your price, when you supply that car, the charging system has to do this. And it's as simple as that. And the power companies with their smart meters, they know just by the level of charge that something like this is going to take. They know how to split that out with their meters already. It's as simple. There's nothing more simple than the gas tax. It goes to the gas station, the people write the check, and they send the tax to the state of Vermont. And I just don't know that we need all this level of complexity when it's as simple can be. But that's my thought.
That was my thought a year ago. I thought it was kind of a simple thing. You plug in and a percentage of it goes, and they send a percentage to the DMV or whatever, and the rest is the fee from Green Mountain Power or whatever it is. I just don't know why it has to be so complicated. Maybe I'm missing. Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I have to agree. I agree with you, Russ, entirely. I will say the fees, the car registration fees, that makes sense to me to explore there, because that's straightforward. People can understand it, and it's a fair way to assess those that prefer or choose single occupancy vehicle. But I got to tell you, the notion of managing 600,000 devices going out to cars and then collecting them, and for all the different types of vehicles, I just feel like that's going in the absolute wrong direction. One key thing you said, Joe, is public acceptance. And that's where I'm going to keep barking about this, but I think that there is a lot to be said for making our roadways smarter, especially to get public buy-in. And that's where network decongestion, people hate traffic. So if we can make smarter, intelligent roadways, tracking where the vehicles are, when they're there, and then communicating that to all of our smart vehicles, as well as fair usage, and also increasing public safety so that we can track emergency vehicles when they need to get through, reporting. Also the notion of variable speed limits. I would just rather us focus on better managing the traffic on our roadways rather than managing cars mileage tracking individual vehicles. And that's where I think the fair usage, which has been employed in other states, would naturally be something that's achievable once we address all those privacy concerns. But I think we would get public buy-in if we can say that investing in these types of smart, intelligent intersections devices that could be entwined with speed lights or the intersection lights, that's where I think that things could happen.
Are you saying that you would not rely on the mileage tax for how far they drive?
I'm saying that it seems infeasible to me to manage sending out devices that users could opt if they wanted to plug
Well,
into.
no,
their-
I mean, let's just forget the devices. And just when you plug in, you get a percentage of it going to the, for the gas tax.
Oh yeah, I'm not against that at all.
No, that's what I'm saying. But when you start talking about the automation of cars where they are, you're going to run into a roadblock about privacy. I'll tell you that. Nobody wants to be on the docket of where, and especially rural Vermont. How are you going to detect in rural Vermont?
So we got that problem with smartphones these days. So I don't know if you know this, when you go to the U Mall or down to Church Street or at the airport, they track that your phone, they don't know it's you, but your phone is there, how long you're there and where you go. So we got all sorts of privacy concerns with how these devices use with internet-based traffic and where things are going. So I think it's surmountable. It's just a matter of whether or not we spend the time doing it and putting in the safeguards in place so that we're making sure that only the right people have access to the data.
Questions? Yes, Joe, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, I mean, the question about why can't we just use, home charging stations and public charging stations, I think, and that's not my area of expertise at all. And so it might be good to get somebody in from, public service department and, or whoever did that study a couple of years ago to review that again and go into what the real challenges are of why maybe that's not possible right now, and I don't know what the future is for that if it's ever going to be possible, because you could see a situation, well, maybe you just put a flat fee in place until that does become possible, right? So you're making up for lost revenue, and but the long term is to kind of go in that direction. But I think that there's some my understanding there are some really practical reasons why that was just not possible, including the way I think rates might be structured is another thing that needs to be considered.
I know the Public Utility Commission has been discussing all of this stuff, and I've got friends in that segment of the market. We've been discussing this for a long time, and I ran, the simplicity of this by them previous, and it's very, very early on, but they are having those discussions, and it would be interesting to get them in front of us to see what is feasible.
Senator Perchlik, that's your department.
Yeah, it's interesting because
I don't see your hand raised.
well, yeah, I feel like I used up all the oxygen on this issue 2 years ago when we talked about it all the time. So one of the issues that we ran into was the fee on the electric rate could cause the electric rate to go over on your car. There's no technology problem, it's just getting it out there. But if you add the fee that you needed to replace the gas tax, then it would be more expensive to charge your car. So it would give people an incentive to get around the device. That was one of the main problems, is that the car charging rate would be higher than your regular rate. So then you'd say like, well, I'm just going to charge slow charge when I can, things like that. But I still like it for the simplicity's sake. I think it's good that AOT is looking into this. I kind of think that if you're going to go the mileage used rate, you'd almost want to do it to everybody. I mean, even though it's way more complicated, as Senator Chittenden had said, because then you got 575,000 devices, but then you would actually get rid of the gas tax. You just wouldn't have a gas tax. And you can't do that all, overnight, but it is something that you need to think about in the long term. But I wouldn't give up on the kilowatt hour charge, because even if you do, as you were proposing, as Senator Kitchell pointed out, you got some people paying double.
Right.
But I'm happy to have that discussion again with the utilities and the PUC. But if you remember, the PUC didn't like it, the utilities didn't like it. So it's kind of like everywhere we went, we had people complaining.
Well, ultimately, they're going to have to like something on that, because they're going to be the benefactor of selling more power. And I mean, they probably have some fights in them about, well, yeah, but you're going to be too much of our business and we're not going to be able to get the rates that we need. Well, that's the fight to have. But eventually, I mean, we're going to electrification. They've got a lot of upgrades they need to do, as we can see in Texas and other parts of the country. And we had a near problem in New England here 3 years ago. But Yeah, I mean, they're going to be the benefactor at the end of the day. They're going to be selling more power. So I don't know why they wouldn't be more of the conversation that we're going to have.
And they were willing to have the conversation. They were just worried about collecting the tax. They don't have to do that now. It's an added thing, and they definitely want to have more electric vehicles and they want to sell the electricity, but basically adding the transportation fee to the electric rate had some issues that they brought up. But I'm happy to keep working on it. I like the idea.
Only one more line item on electric bill. I mean, it's not like they don't have 6 others on.
Yeah, right. You're right.
And they can detect, and what we heard is some of the more rural utilities don't have smart meters. So if you don't have smart meters and you don't have internet access at the home where they're charging, you can't do the same kind of things that GMP and BED can do. So at one point I was advocating for a pilot that we, have GMP and BED and others that could do it. Just do it for like a penny. Just have them collect 1 cent per kilowatt hour and see how it works. And could we do it that way? But we just ran into a lot of people complaining. So we issued a couple studies is what we did on the issue. And so we could have them come back in and go over those as Joe suggested, if we want.
And I'm, just from what I'm hearing you say, I totally understand where you're coming from on the complexity of it. It makes me think that as we do this plan, we maybe should revisit that question again as an alternative, and and maybe that is the thing that we would pilot, is a more comprehensive transportation infrastructure charge that's collected all through Vermont. Maybe there's a way that could be piloted and tested, and we could see how that could work as well as part of this. Not as part of the study, but as the outcome. It's like the next step is that's the way we want to go. So let's figure it out.
I just look at it like this. I mean, 15 employees to try to monitor all this stuff. And I don't know if it's 50 employees or 2 employees or 25 employees. At $80,000 a piece is $1.2 million a year and added. And that's just simple stuff. $1.2 million and just, I don't know. It's just a level of complexity just bothers me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a classic debate you have in terms of the more you want to refine it and the more precise, the more complicated and the more costly it becomes.
Yeah.
There are obviously, if you just did the surcharge or whatever we would call it on the registration, that's easy. It is easy. It's not as precise. And that's, to me, this is the kind of discussion that we always have. And that is the level of precision and whether the difference in ultimately what the cost to the consumer or to the driver is worth the additional cost it adds to them and to the cost of administration.
Yeah, to save $1, you're spending $3. Just trying to fine tune it so much that to be fair, where at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter.
You're opting, let's make it simple and as least expensive and administratively straightforward as we can.
Yeah.
Okay. I completely agree, Senator Kitchell. I would just add, I would be up for the complexity if there was more benefit than just a fair, fine-grained assessment method. If it was also going to achieve in greater public safety, less traffic, less CO2 emissions, then I'd support the complexity. But I'm not seeing that with that notion of the devices.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But we get this all, we have this debate so often in terms of, perfection being the enemy of the good, so to speak.
Well, we're passing out monies to buy electric cars like water. So you got to take some of that money. The incentives are getting bigger and bigger and bigger to buy electric vehicles. So anyway, anything else this morning? Yes, Senator Perchlik.
Joe, do you said that the next step that AOP is looking at on this is to hire a consultant to do a mileage-based user fee plan. Do you have an idea what you were thinking of spending on this consultant?
Yeah, and to be clear, it's the plan for the whole system, not just a mileage-based user fee, but it's per kilowatt hour and everything. it's order of magnitude $250,000.
And is that already in the budget as proposed?
Yes, it'll end up being spread out over a couple fiscal, the federal fiscal years.
Thinking on being a consultant, this is the time to jump in.
I know.
This is where the money is. I'll tell you. Anything else from Joe this morning? That was a lot of discussion. It is a serious issue, and I think it's not going to be solved overnight, but we got to discuss it because it's going to be here sooner or later. Jane, in 2050, you and I can look back and say, see the mistakes we made?
2050?
Yeah.
I guess I better reassess my my retirement plan.
What, you're retiring?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. What are we gonna
Take care
do?
of the cat.
I know.
Oh,
Okay.
too
I
much
think-
information going on here. She's retiring.
She is retired. This is what she does in her retirement.
What?
You are retired. This is what you're doing with your retirement, helping the
That's
state.
right. That's right.
I know, and and I have to say, before the advent of so much technology and the proliferation of emails, there used to be some delineation between work life and personal life, and in the last 2 years, there is none. And it's not just legislators. You email people on the weekend just to do some work, and they're responding back to you. So it has changed our whole lifestyle, and it creates the expectation, since you got that email immediately, I should get my response back. And so it becomes so such a different, I don't know, quality of life almost impact. But technology's out there. Senator Chittenden's going to visualize
Oh, yeah. He's got
a
it all
solution
down.
to my problem.
Yeah. He's got it all figured out.
So if I may, Senator Kitchley, you mentioned before the meeting started that there's a joint information technology committee. I'm intrigued by that because that would actually help me with my UVM role, so as to maintain some of my professional accreditation. So I'd love to learn more about that at some point.
Yeah, it's you should speak to Senator Mazza. Currently, the Senate members are Senator Brock, who's the vice chair, Senator Pearson, and myself. I can't remember if there's a fourth person, but I would be more than happy to relinquish my appointment to you.
And I'd love to talk more about that.
So if I don't get reappointed, I would not be, because I've already been appointed to the most
Well,
august
we made the
group
appointments. We made the appointments the other day, so they haven't been announced.
on joint information technology.
I thought we did. I thought we had a meeting on that the other day. It's not published anywhere.
I don't think so.
You did other appointments.
We did the other ones. We did the Green Mountain Care Board, and we did the Snowmobile Council.
Okay, I thought we did.
Government accountability.
Oh,
Committee.
the GAC.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, if not, if we haven't done it, go ahead, Senator Chittenden. You ought to get a hold of Becca.
Yes, shoot her an email
Will do.
and
Okay,
tell her that you've heard from a reliable source that I would be willing to that I would not
Our next-
that I would feel that you would be probably a better member than I. And I'm on record stating that.
The next item is the about the long forgotten county in Vermont, Chittenden. So does anyone want to take a 5-minute break, or you want to continue on? What's your wishes?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back together at 10 o'clock. Okay, Liz?
Okey-doke.